This video covers the Chapter 45 event cards, Part 1. So the first half of our Chapter 45 event cards. The first event that goes along with this picture here is the Montgomery Bus Boycott, the years 1955 to 1956. Again, on your event card, some of the things you could have, you don't have to have all of these. You might have something similar to it. You don't necessarily have to copy everything that I'm putting, but this gives you an idea of the types of things you should have down. The boycott came about because of the arrest of Rosa Parks, right? Buses in Montgomery were segregated, and Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white person. She was kicked off the bus. She was arrested. And this led to the boycott. On the first day of the boycott, 90% of African Americans who usually ride the bus honored the boycott. In order to make that work, African Americans organized an elaborate carpool system, right? If you needed the bus to get to work, but you wanted to take part in the boycott, you could set up a ride and they could get you to work, get you back home, in order to really make the bus companies feel the economic impact of having 90% of their African American riders refuse to ride. Ultimately, the boycott was successful, and Montgomery desegregated its buses. Another important impact of this that you might have had down was that this propelled Martin Luther King Jr. to a national reputation. This really put him in the national spotlight as a civil rights leader. He was one of the main people who organized and orchestrated the boycott. The next event, the integration of Central High School in 1957. Talking about Little Rock, Arkansas. Central High School was a public high school. This is 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education case. And yet, Arkansas was continuing to resist integrating its schools. So, when they were forced to integrate the schools and accept 9 African American students, the governor, a guy by the name of Orville Faubus, called out the Arkansas National Guard to prevent integration, to keep the African American students from going into the all-white high school. And the picture here is an iconic photograph of Elizabeth Eckford, one of the African American students, being followed by a pretty angry crowd of white people. And you can see the soldiers in the background from the National Guard preventing her from being able to go into the school. Well, President Eisenhower wasn't very happy that a governor was trying to block the Supreme Court. And so he sends in federal troops to basically reverse what the governor was doing, to maintain order, to prevent scenes like the one you see in the picture, and to enforce the order to integrate the school. 9 African American students attended Central High School for that year and effectively had military bodyguards. They didn't necessarily follow them everywhere they went during the school day, but they were there to make sure the students could get into the school without facing, unruly crowds. But those African American students faced a very tough year. They faced constant harassment from white students. It was not an easy school year for what became known as the Little Rock Nine. Following that school year, the state of Arkansas actually shut the school down for a while rather than allow integration to continue. Our next event covers the SitIns, the first sit-ins in the South, and the year for this is 1960. First off, what is a sit-in? Well, it's when protesters will go to a lunch counter or a coffee shop like we heard in the last chapter, and basically sit down, refuse to move, right? We are here, we're going to protest peacefully, but we're not going to move. The first big one in the South was held by 4 black students at a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Woolworths refused to serve African Americans. They came in, they sat down, they asked for service, they were denied, and then they sat there all day. Store closed, they came back the next day, did it again, right? And, didn't break anything, didn't smash anything, just sat there peacefully without being served as a protest. And these sit-ins got a lot of attention and started to spread across the South. And often they were pretty successful. The Greensboro sit-ins, for example, led to a wider boycott of Woolworths. Right, this was sort of a chain, and there was a wider boycott of the store. And so eventually they gave in and agreed to serve African Americans. The last event for Part 1 was the Freedom Rides of 1961. And these started because CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, organized bus rides to test the southern states. The Supreme Court had ruled that segregating interstate transportation was unconstitutional. So CORE filled up buses with African Americans and white people mixed together and sent them down into cities in the South. Several of those freedom rides got to their destination without any problem, right? There was no violence, nothing of that sort. They just got to where they were going without any problem. However, there were several of the freedom rides where the riders faced violence, like in this picture in Anniston, Alabama, when the bus itself was bombed and the riders were kicked, punched, harassed, physically assaulted as they got out of the burning bus. Other places, freedom riders were arrested, and so partially successful for the civil rights movement, partially not.